think it's safe to say that we have all been here at more than one point or another. Pop in a game, you get started, and then you get greeted with a character roster. And to me, these are always awesome. I love the ability to play as different characters in a game where each of them offer a slightly different experience. Even if it's just a few characters, it provides so much replayability to the most linear games out there. But of course, there is a couple drawbacks to multiple characters in a game if it isn't taken into consideration. Easily, the biggest potential problem is balance, making sure one character doesn't overshadow the others, well, in most cases at least. Sometimes we'll get a broken character as a final reward, other times it's an oversight on the developer's part. And for better or worse, broken characters can easily define a game in its meta if it's competitive based. So today we're going to be looking at 10 broken or overpowered characters in gaming. The reasoning could be any kind. The picks could even be from a very short roster for the game. But the one thing they all have in common is that they outshine the rest of the characters by a good margin. As usual, this list is not in any particular order except for the final pick, but let's get into it. So, some of you might feel like this is a bit of a cop-out due to how recent the game is, but too bad. I had trouble picking the last two for this list, and whether you like it or not, Funky Kong in Tropical Freeze was made to be broken. He's got 5 hit points instead of 3, he can continuously roll as long as he wants, spikes are not a problem for him, he can breathe underwater, and he has that sexy surfboard to help him glide slowly and correct any mistimed jumps he made. There's a lot to like about Funky Kong, who is essentially this game's version of Super Guide, which I gotta give credit to Retro this time around for it. I was never one who got upset or saw these easy modes as insulting as a gamer or anything like that. And keep in mind, I'm someone who grew up in the era where games were harder. If any demographic is gonna have a meltdown about this aspect of new Nintendo games, it's the one I'm in. But whether you cared about it or not, no one can really argue how they handled the concept this time around. Cause while yes, Funky is completely overpowered when compared to the other Kongs, they still didn't make him God mode. Funky can still easily screw up and lose lives in this game. Granted, it's harder to do so, but he still has a couple setbacks, like for example his ability to hover with his surfboard. Like I mentioned, it can help correct any mistimed jumps he makes, but it can also backfire as once Funky uses it, he loses any momentum he had built up and it can throw players off guard at first. In fact, from what I played, it was causing me more lives than it did save them. Granted, that's because I still need more time to get adjusted to Funky, and that's not gonna happen when I'm first trying him out at a friend's house on just a couple levels. But it made me appreciate his inclusion a lot more than I thought I would. I'm still waiting for a price drop before I buy the game for myself, but I could see myself not waiting as long as I thought. He might not be the most overpowered character in all of gaming, but in Tropical Freeze, he's definitely no second banana. Ugh, why the hell did I write that shit? So in a similar way like Funky Kong, I'm sure some of you may feel this pick is improper since you don't physically control the character, and fair enough if you feel this way, but for me, I think it fits. If not, well, don't care. So, Pikmin, one of my favorite series in all of gaming. I love its gameplay, even when the goals change from game to game. I love its world, its characters, and its creatures. Whenever I think of the GameCube, Pikmin is one of the first games I think of. And in its sequel, we were introduced to 3 new types of Pikmin. The purple ones, the white ones, and the parasite ones that can only be found in some caves. As anyone who's played the game knows that each Pikmin has their own strengths and weaknesses, such as red Pikmin having heat resistance and are the most efficient when fighting enemies, yellow having electrical properties and can be thrown higher, etc. Well, for me, out of all 8 types that we've been introduced to so far, in my opinion, white Pikmin are in a class all of their own. They're the quickest, they have poison resistance, they can see buried items that can be dug up. If they help carry items, they'll make the process of bringing said items back a hell of a lot quicker. And the best part is, they're poisonous. So if one gets eaten, they're gonna kamikaze the creature who ate it and do a good chunk of damage. Like, look at how quickly I took out this boss, just because he ate some white Pikmin. That's insane! Now I know some may be thinking, do I know about Purple Pikmin's awesome ability to stun enemies when you throw them at them? And well, yeah I do. And it's amazing how busted this move can be. The thing is though, while yes they can make chumps out of a lot of enemies in Pikmin 2, and can act as 10 Pikmin for carrying stuff, that's all they have going for them. And hey, those 2 things are great by themselves, but in my opinion, white Pikmin still outclass them. I have a feeling this is why Wing Pikmin replaced them in the main campaign for Pikmin 3, as they share White Pikmin's awesome item retrieval abilities, but nerfed their battle ability in an attempt to not overshadow the red, yellow, and blue variants this time around. But hey, at least they still appeared in challenge mode, so that's something I guess. If I was speaking about Generation 1 Pokemon alone, then I could have probably just talked about an entire typing all by itself for this mod, as anyone who's played red, green, blue, or yellow, they know psychic types were completely overpowered back then. They had a great move pool, their only weakness were bug type moves, which was beyond crap at the time. And a lot of people forget that ghost type moves weren't effective back in the late 90s. Not to mention, even if they were, the only ghost type back then was the Gengar line, and they were half poison, weak to, you guessed it, psychic types. And it's a wonder why Dark and Steel types were introduced in Gold and Silver, wasn't it? But of course, it'd be a little boring to group them all into one category, where at the end of the day, we all know who was the strongest Pokemon back then. Starts with a Mew, ends in a 2. Yep, essentially one of the OGs when it comes to intentionally overpowered characters. Mewtwo even to this day still fits that bill. Back then he was the reward for becoming the champion and acted as the final boss. If you planned to catch him without a Master Ball, then you were easily gonna have to put up with one of the greatest struggles in the game. But once you succeeded, you got a level 70 Pokemon that was a pure broken type, and he easily had the best stats in the game. A base 154 special stat and 130 speed stat alone made Mewtwo the best. And Game Freak has made it their mission to always make sure Mewtwo never slipped under the Uber tier. Even after the special split in Gen 2 where his special defense was lowered to 90, he was still a force to be reckoned with due to his pretty awesome stats and amazing move pool. But hey, it's still not good enough? Well, we'll throw in 2 Mega Evolutions to give this Pokemon even more options for battling. It goes without saying, as the only Pokemon to consistently be in the top tier every generation thus far, Mewtwo is a Pokepimp, and he will Poke-slap the fuck out of you if you're not prepared. It's funny what time can do for a game canon. 5 to 10 years ago, Sonic R would have still been getting a lot of hate and being criticized heavily, and I mean, to be fair, rightfully so. I do feel bad for anyone who paid full price for this content-lacking, unbalanced, and janky-as-fuck game like this one was. No matter how much time goes by, it's still one of Sonic's more infamous games. But by 2018, people seem to have mellowed out on this one, and some have even admitted it's a guilty pleasure. I've never really talked about it too much on this channel, just a couple references here and there, but I am one of those people who do have good memories on this game, even if they're based around nostalgia, and in the end, kind of misguided. But hey, after the Genesis games, this was like the first brand new Sonic game I had played in like 4 or 5 years until Sonic Adventure 2 came into my life. So you know what? Let me have this one. Though nonetheless, there's always been a bit of charm with this relatively innocent time waster nowadays. Although there's only 5 stages, each of them feel distinct with that music, and having collectibles to get during the race did add a little, and I mean little, replayability. One of the 2 types of collectibles were the Chaos Emeralds. Collect all of them and of course you'll gain access to Super Sonic. As with the trend with this list, blew away the rest of the competition. For me, there were only 3 characters worth playing as. Metal Sonic, Metal Knuckles, and then there's let's make it more of a challenge to actually lose the character. He has the fastest speed, has Sonic's double jump, and can run on water. Yeah, he's literally God mode. Now, to be fair, this was during a time where balancing wasn't common for rosters like it is nowadays, or at least not as much of an afterthought, and Super Sonic was supposed to be the final bonus for the game. You know, sometimes when a game gives you something overpowered as a reward for mastering a game or fully completing it, and that's all fine for single player, but for 2-player games, just no. No, 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 no. Because this roster is highly unbalanced as it is, where some characters clearly outshine others. But for anyone to pick Super Sonic in 2-player mode, fuck you. Though, to be fair, the real challenge will be getting anyone to actually play Sonic R with you. Now that's where the real challenge comes from this game.
Oh, but of course Resident Evil is making a top 10 list yet again. Seriously, is that all you fucking play, douchebag gaming?
Maybe. Shut up. With how much I put into Resident Evil's bonus modes, specifically Mercenaries, there was no way it wasn't going to make the list considering how much knowledge I have on the characters you can play as in them, especially Resident Evil 5. Even little details that most would overlook I kinda sadly know about. Like for example, any character that has sunglasses will be immune to flash grenades. Yeah, totally not a sign of me playing this game too much. But nonetheless, when I was thinking of overpowered characters that I could choose from this episode, there was one from this game that I felt easily made the list, because this character is the very definition of final reward character. So back when the game first came out, Mercenaries didn't have everything unlocked from the get-go. You had to play through each stage and get a certain amount of points to unlock the next map, as well as a new character or costume. Well, once you got to the prison stage, the final playable map for Resident Evil 5's Mercenaries mode, if you were able to get 40,000 points on it and survive, you'll unlock Wesker in a STARS outfit, and they weren't even subtle about this costume's loadout. But let's talk Albert Wesker a bit on his own merits. When compared to all 8 different characters you can play as in Resident Evil 5, Wesker has one of, if not the most potent moveset. His Cobra Strike, second only to maybe Rebecca's Flame Spray, will get the job done on all normal moves, and is his go-to kill move. But even then, the rest of his attacks are still decent. If they're not on par with the others' attack power, then they are generally much faster, with the only drawback being his ultimate attack, the Ghost Butterfly, that sometimes misses due to its speed. When he has his glasses on, he's immune to flash grenades, and while the last perk is situational, having the ability to dash has its own merits, especially since it can save time, and in a mode like Mercenaries, time means everything. With great stats that fit his character, he was made to be overpowered. Just give him a pistol, headshot stun an enemy, then Cobra Strike. Rinse and repeat. then uses Magnum on mini-bosses, or to kill Plagas when they threaten to kill your combo. And for years, that was the Wesker Midnight costume loadout in a nutshell, and it showed on the leaderboards. He dominated. Now some may be thinking, why the hell am I picking the Stars loadout instead of Midnight then? Which, good question. The evidence would suggest that it was the better loadout for high scores, and I mean, true enough. But the only reason why Midnight Wesker flooded the leaderboards instead of the Stars loadout was for one reason, and one reason alone. The Stars costume was too powerful. In Resident Evil 5's Mercenaries, the developers added a new mechanic where if you killed an enemy with a melee move instead of a bullet, then you would get rewarded with 5 seconds on the clock, hence why Wesker's Cobra Strike rose to the top. It was quick and deadly. Well, as I've suggested a couple times now, his Stars loadout was the strongest in the original vanilla Mercenaries. His Samurai Edge took only 2 shots to kill normal enemies instead of 3 like his other pistol took. It also had a high critical hit rate that would explode heads like it was nothing half the time, and not to mention it would put most bosses in the stun mode just off of 1 shot anywhere on their body. That alone would scream to you overpowered for his own good. But then compare Magnums. The L-Hawk, while not as strong as the hand cannon Midnight has, it shoots faster thanks to its lower recoil rate, and it's a fucking Magnum. It's still gonna do more than enough damage to get the job done. If it was just a Samurai Edge in the L-Hawk, he'd still be a force to be reckoned with. But no, oh no, they also gave him this little beauty. The Hydra shotgun, which is easily the best all-around weapon that isn't a rocket launcher or a Gatling gun. So you can see where I'm going with this. These 3 guns were so strong that it was actually a detriment to him. It's harder to get 5 seconds off each melee kill if your guns are taking them out before you can melee. So yeah, overpowered out the wazoo. But if that's not enough proof for you, well, then the PS4 and Xbox One remasters will give it to you, since that release finally combined both the Mercenaries vanilla and Reunion characters into one full roster. Something that should have been fucking there from the beginning, but whatever, better late than never, I guess. Well, Capcom was still stupid or lazy enough not to include the Reunion characters in the Versus mode, but that's a rant for another day. Anyway, when they finally combined the 2 rosters, what they did was just use the Mercenaries Reunion as a base, and then just brought over the original 10. The problem was, the original 10 characters and costumes were not designed for Mercenaries Reunion. When you compare them, they're completely underpowered to the 8 newer characters, except for, you guessed it, Wesker's Stars. In fact, in my opinion, he's still one of the top loadouts, even when you compare him to the Reunion characters. It's not as big of a gap since all 8 of them were given more firepower, but he still outclasses almost everyone due to his raw power. And for Mercenaries Reunion, where the combo means more than the seconds on the clock do, that raw power goes a long way. Like straight up, anyone who's played this on PlayStation 3 then play this again on PlayStation 4, they can vouch that he was essentially a Reunion character all along. This guy transitioned flawlessly. If that doesn't speak volumes to just how broken his loadout was, then I don't know what will. Infamous. Easily my favorite franchise that made its debut during the 7th generation. As a casual fan of X-Men, the series was hitting all the right notes for me. I loved its story, its characters, themes, and art style when I wanted to get creative. But most importantly, I loved its gameplay. Mixing in a third-person shooter with the exploration and freedom to explore these cities like you could in Assassin's Creed but feel even better while doing so, I became addicted and I'll be excited for any future titles. Which is exactly what happened with Second Son. Hell, it's the game that finally made me get off my butt and get a PlayStation 4. Christ, I bought the game before I even had the system as I had to buy mine off eBay. Yeah, remember when PlayStation 4s were hard to find for a little bit? But when I could finally play it, it took me only about a week to platinum this game, which anyone who's played knows it consists of having to play through it twice. If we were to view this as food, then I probably didn't even chew. Granted, it could have been the hype of being my first game on my fancy new console, but while I was satisfied at the time, I still wanted more. And a few months later, that's exactly what I got with Infamous First Light, a DLC-style standalone prequel game to Second Son that starts supporting character Fetch as the focus. And much like its older brother, I flew through this game too, except First Light included an arena-type mode to boost the replayability. As a fan of the Mercenaries that I clearly just displayed, this was right up my alley. Kill enemies and try to get the highest score possible? Yeah, that's always going to be heaven for me. It's always going to appeal to me, especially if there's more than one character to give it more variety. Which the game does if you own Second Son. You'll be able to play as these maps as Delsin, the character you played as in that game. At first, I thought it was a pretty sweet bonus. I loved it since it adapted your progress to here, and could even play as the Hero or Infamous version too if you got that far. Plus, giving the player a chance to use his concrete powers outside of the final boss and post-game is much appreciated. But you can tell this was so much of an afterthought. Delsin can't even compete with Fetch. It's pathetic, really. I mean, I'm glad they made improvements to make Fetch more fun to play as and feel even more badass this time around. In fact, she's my favorite character to play as throughout all of Infamous. As a semi-sequel, you kind of expect improvements like that, but how could they not have seen the difference in power between the two? She's quicker, hits faster, is a hell of a lot more powerful in her Neon abilities, which to be fair makes sense. Delsin is a conduit that absorbs other people's powers. He's a sponge in that sense. So for him to not have Neon powers as strong as hers makes sense, but come on. He also has smoke, video, and concrete powers. Delsin should be a lot more versatile here. Want to see just how big of a gap there is between the two? Well, here's the score I got with Delsin after about a 20-minute session. And now here's Fetch's in that same time frame. It's no contest on who the better character is, which isn't really her fault. These maps were built around her and her playstyle. Delsin's just an added bonus. But that's just disgusting how big of a difference it is. And really it all comes down to one reason. It's not because Delsin is not as strong as Fetch. If anything, he has more options due to having access to 4 different powers. No, the problem is that Fetch can take a hell of a lot more punishment before being put into dying status, whereas Delsin is constantly getting stunned and put into dying after just a few hits. The reason why there's such a gap in points is because you're going to be spending more time healing Delsin than you are killing enemies. And hey, for some they may prefer playing as him for the extra challenge. But no matter how good you may get, you're not getting the points Fetch can get in the same amount of time that she can get him in. She's that much better. If we ever get another game in this series, I hope a mode like this returns, but good god, please balance things a bit. So a while back I did my first mini review on Super Mario 64 DS. I made the argument that the remake isn't nearly as bad as others make it out to be, especially when it comes to controls. If anything, it felt like it was just different, not bad. I don't know, maybe I'm just an uncultured, low-standard swine who should expect more from his video games and has no business reviewing them. Probably a true story, but if I'm wrong and the controls are crap, then I just didn't notice it as much. Probably because I play this remake as Luigi the most. Easily the most broken character we have ever gotten to play as in a 3D Mario game. I'm not kidding. The air this guy gets is even more impressive than Mario when he has FLUDD. It's unbelievable, really. So Mario 64 DS had the ability to play as 4 different characters. You start out as Yoshi, who gets a flutter jump and has the ability to swallow enemies and spit out eggs, but at the cost of being able to pick up anything or hit a lot of the things that plumbers can. Mario returned just as he did in the original, and Wario was a power version of him with the cost of low running speed and a gimp jump. Luigi, on the other hand, runs and swims the fastest. He easily has the highest jump in the game. When he does a backflip, he automatically does the twirly float move that Mario could only do in tornadoes or bouncing off enemies with propellers on their head. And Jesus goddamn Christ, the guy can pull a Jesus and walk on water for a bit. Luigi is literally God mode incarnate, and holy hell, that's 2 characters on this list that are water walkers. Luigi doesn't even need a power-up. Why is Mario the face of Nintendo again? Like seriously, why is he? Outside of certain stars in the final boss with Bowser, once you unlock Luigi, playing as the other 3 just become pointless as they feel obsolete in comparison. He's that good. Now, I know for some people they don't like playing as Luigi since they feel it makes the game a cakewalk, and while yes, it definitely makes things a little easier, it still isn't an issue for me since outside of a handful of stars, the rest were always easy to get. So I never looked at Luigi being broken as a bad thing for this game, in fact, quite the opposite. Due to his abilities, you can approach so many stars in ways that you could have only dreamed of doing as Mario. This, in my opinion, is the best example possible to showcase this. That's just amazing, and it heightens that level of freedom that the original did so well in the first place. It's that same feeling I got with Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey last year. The ability to approach stars in any way I want is always a joy. I'm probably in the minority of this, in fact I have no doubt that I am, but while Luigi is broken in this game, he's broken in the best way possible. Do I even have to say anything else? And this is me sucking at it. There's people who can get this little bastard around the entire stage in one flight. Meta Knight was the poster boy of what defined a broken character during the 7th generation. I'm not a competitive player by any means, but even the most casual players had to see just how good he was in Brawl. I remember a couple times Meta Knight was being described as a character that played more like someone would in Melee than they would in Brawl, and that aspect alone easily boosted him to his own tier without question. Usually banned from most tournaments, even at home. If someone picked him, you had to be on guard. Nowadays, he's been taken down a couple notches to make him more balanced, with Bayonetta ruling the game as a Smash 4, but for a time there was no questioning his authority. Meta Knight ruled over Brawl's meta. Kinda fitting now that I think about it. You all knew this little fucker was making the list. He's easily the most iconic broken character in gaming. It's Oddjob. And what an interesting reason why he's so broken too. It's not because he's stronger, quicker, or has better stats. No. Every character pretty much plays the same in GoldenEye. The only difference that makes Oddjob stand out from the rest is because for whatever reason, Rare decided to make him a midget in this game. Even to this day, I still don't fully understand why they made Oddjob so short. I mean, in real life, Harold Sakata, the guy who played him in the movie Goldfinger, wasn't shown to be short. He's around the same size as Sean Connery, so why? Only thing I can think of is that they got him mixed up with Knick-Knack from the Man with the Golden Guy. Man with the Golden Guy. Fuck me. Man with the golden gun. I mean, at least it would make sense since Knick-Knack is a little person. Well, at least Knifefire got it right and made him the short character, and gave Oddjob his iconic hat as an exclusive item. Good on you, oldie, eh? But anyway, anyone who's played or at least knows about GoldenEye N64 has at least heard the term no Oddjob. And it's pretty simple to see why. I mean, what's harder to shoot something? To shoot a moving target. And what's harder to shoot a moving target? It's size. And that's exactly what was wrong with Oddjob. He was a pain in the ass to shoot. Even with modern controls, being a smaller target than the rest is going to give the player a huge advantage. But to have this advantage on the N64 where the controls are dated to say the least, yeah, it's going to be a pain in the ass to have to constantly look down and try and track the little bastard, while he can continuously just dick shot you without even having to worry about aiming nearly as much. Hell, try to do a slappers only match on an Oddjob. That'll be quite the experience to say the least. But now I know some of you are probably foaming at the mouth saying, how the hell is Oddjob only number 2 and not number 1? Worst top 10 lists ever? You failed? Go kill yourself again. Geez, overreaction much voice inside my head? No, I'm not crazy. But yes, Oddjob is only number 2. Why? Well, what would you say if I knew of a character that follows in the footsteps of Oddjob, but is an even bigger offender? Yep, it exists. And no, it's not Knick-Knack. So, you're wondering what character in gaming outclasses Oddjob in being an unbalanced short character. Surely no one would make the same mistake like Oddjob. Well, not only did they make the same mistake, but they made an entire roster based around this. Oh yeah, it exists. And that game is South Park. So a long ways back I talked about this game. It was in the 3rd episode that I had ever done for the channel. I can understand if you didn't watch it, I know I certainly wouldn't nowadays. But anyway, the very first South Park game that was ever made for consoles was a first-person shooter. Even after all these years, I still don't get what made them think turning South Park into a shooter was a good idea. But meh, whatever. The story had its pros and cons. And at one point I brought up this game's multiplayer. At the end of the day, I still think this multiplayer is actually one of the more overlooked ones for the N64. Say what you want about the main game. Blasting others with dodgeballs, yellow snowballs, and even mustard gas, Terrence and Philip dolls could easily rival GoldenEye's multiplayer. Lots of stages, a decent variety in weapons, and all the fan-favorite characters at the time wrapped into a raunchy and comedic fun shooter. And while I always maintain that it can always be fun with 3 other players, there is one glaring issue about it. The characters themselves. Specifically, their proportions. Now, to the developers Iguana Entertainment's credit, they were respectful to each of the characters' size and body types. A little dated nowadays, but these characters do look like what you'd think they would in 3D, and they're pretty faithful. The problem with this is that it's completely unbalanced because you can break the roster up into 2 sections, kids and adults. Well, you can probably already see where I'm going with this, but if you pick to play as an adult character, then you're at a disadvantage for exactly the same reason you'd be if you had to fight against Oddjob, except this is an entire roster. Now, of course, you could always make a rule where it's either a match of adults only or kids only, but even if you do kids only, there's still the Oddjob of even the kids. No, I'm not shitting you. This is Starvin' Marvin, a semi-popular character back in the day that started in a couple episodes. As you can see, much like the name suggests, he's a skinny character and is a little bit shorter than the rest of the kid characters. To the game's credit, they did only give him 50 HP to start out with instead of 100 like the rest of the characters, except you can see just how annoying it'll be to him with almost any type of weapons in this game. Could you imagine going up against him as an adult character? It sucks. Let's just say that. It sucks monkey balls. And because of this, Starvin' Marvin is not my number 1 pick of the most broken character in gaming. Oh no, no, not even close. Yeah, there's someone even worse than Marvin in this game. So I'm gonna give you 10 seconds to try and think of who would fit the bill for being even smaller than Marvin. And think back to just the first couple seasons. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Have you figured it out? Well, if you picked Ike, Kyle's younger Canadian human football, then you would be correct. Have yourself a cookie and fuck you, cause you know what, just why not? Fuck you, South Park. Oh my god. Who would be so cruel to include someone this short and small in a shooter? Like Christ, even the kid characters will have a hard time aiming at him, let alone the adult characters. It's damn near impossible to hit him without the Terrence and Philip dolls. Again, they did try to compensate his size by only giving him a quarter of everyone else's health, but once he picks up some health items, it's game over, and you're not beating the cocksucker who picked Ike. And if you do have no limits on who can pick what, then pray you're quick enough to get him, cause if not, you're in for a world of hurt. By an infant, no less. Hey, maybe that's the joke. One of the most overpowered characters in gaming is still in diapers.
Baba.